Hello and welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to pick up where we left off with our discussion of the arrival of the first peoples into the Americas. If you remember, last time we talked about the arrival of the first peoples into North America, and we talked about how various native civilizations developed as a result of that migration. One of the key distinguishing features of this development is that these civilizations and peoples developed usually along geographical lines. So the peoples who settled first in modern day Canada, those cultures and civilizations look much different from, let's say, the people who settled in southeast, what is nowadays the United States, states like Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama. Their cultures, their traditions are going to look much different, right? So usually divided along the lines of whether or not these people will develop agriculture, whether or not they'll develop cities, or whether or not they'll remain kind of nomadic. So we're going to pick up that discussion today by shifting our focus from the United States or North America and Canada, this region here, to what was then referred to, or what scholars today refer to as Mesoamerica, which is mostly modern day Mexico. Okay, so we briefly discussed last time different ideas and theories about how and why early humans migrated into North America, kind of what the reasoning was behind that, and also how they did so. We talked about the land bridge theory, humans crossing the Bering Strait, also possibly kind of moving along the coast. And we're going to shift our attention from here to Mesoamerica, modern day Mexico. I bring this up because as I talked about when we talked about entry into North America, this is a very, let's say it's a hot topic in history / archaeology nowadays. It's a hot topic because our date range and our ideas about how and when this happened are very much so subject to change. So I'm recording this video in 2020. 10 years from now, the story might look very different in terms of date range. So with the arrival into North America, the dates range anywhere from the first peoples moving in 30,000 years ago to 15,000 years ago. The same is true. It's important to consider that range when talking about the first peoples of Mesoamerica. The date range is going to be anywhere from 20,000 years to 11,000 years, give or take. And again, this is largely because we simply don't have enough evidence. Well, we don't have enough evidence, and there's constantly new evidence coming in every year, it seems like. So these dates are tentative at best because new archaeological evidence is constantly flooding in. We're constantly discovering new sites that are challenging our pre-existing ideas about when people first reach here. So can't give you an exact date. If you took my history class, this is not a question I would ask you on a test. Well, it might be a good discussion question, right? What are current ideas? What are current theories about when peoples first reached Mesoamerica? But it wouldn't be like a good multiple choice question unless it was like a all of the above type thing, right? So we don't know. I mean, we have a range. Now, again, little caveat here. When I say we don't know exactly, right? It's not like modern history. It's not like talking about World War II. I can say that the United States entered World War II December 7th, 1941. I know the exact day, right? Why? Because of the amount of evidence and records that we have. With ancient history, you have to be a lot more flexible, right? Okay, so we're talking about the arrival of the first peoples into Mesoamerica, but most of this discussion is going to focus on the emergence of the first culture, the first dominant culture in Mesoamerica, that being the Olmecs. So we're going to spend most of our time talking about today. The Olmecs, probably amongst other things, best known for the stone heads that they carved. We'll return to these bad boys a little bit later to explain the reason behind it. But you've probably, if you've heard of the Olmecs, you've probably seen these pictures kind of associated with them. So the Olmec people and the Olmec culture was the first distinct culture. Now, they're not the first people of Mesoamerica. I want to make that very clear. But they're the first distinct culture to emerge in Mesoamerica. Now, this is a little tricky, right? Because you can ask the question, well, what do we mean by culture? What do we mean by distinct culture? Okay, they're not the first people, so what separates them from the previous people? When historians / archaeologists talk about culture, we're of course, we're talking about the tangible aspects of culture that are left behind. Stuff like art, writing, architecture, cities especially. And in this regard, the Olmecs are the first people, they're the first urbanized culture. They're the first major city dwelling culture of Mesoamerica. They're also the culture who we think, we'll come back to this later, who we think developed the first system of writing in the Americas, period. So that's kind of, when I say first culture, that's what I'm referring to. Their technological advancements, their artistic advancements, stuff like that. Again, first people, they're not the first people. The first people arrive in this area, like I said before, anywhere from 21,000 years ago to 15,000 years ago. I think I said 11,000 years ago before that. Give or take a few thousand years, right? What we do see happen, so we have this worldwide event. If you've watched my lectures on Mesoamerica or ancient Egypt, we have this worldwide event that's referred to as the Neolithic Revolution. Sometimes it's called the Agricultural Revolution. This is the shift from people being primarily nomadic, hunters and gatherers, to primarily agricultural-based civilizations and cultures. That's why it's sometimes called the Agricultural Revolution. I prefer Neolithic because it also involves the domestication of animals. So agricultural kind of leaves out that. Anyway, different discussion for a different day. But what we see happen in Mesoamerica, the worldwide date is about 10,000 BC. That's usually, and again, give or take a few thousand years. But cultures in the Mesopotamian region, the modern day Middle East, Africa, you start to see agriculture develop around 10,000 BC. People adopt agriculture, I should say. In Mesoamerica, it comes a little later, about 7,000 BC. This has more to do with, like any region, right? This has more to do with geography than it does like these people's technological advancement. Okay, but we see agriculture develop in Mesoamerica around 7,000 BC. We have a nice little painting here that's showing a person who's growing maize, closely related to modern day corn. And so the agricultural development in Mesoamerica is centered around the production of corn, beans, squash, very hardy, very carbohydrate focused potatoes, or not potatoes, yams, right? These foods, the climate in Mesoamerica, modern day Mexico, is very suited to growing these crops. So agriculture starts to develop in this region 7,000 BC. And the Olmecs develop from these previous agricultural people. What's going to set the Olmecs apart is the levels of population that Olmec cities will reach. Okay, population density, right? So the Olmecs emerge, again, this is modern day Mexico. Mesoamerica refers to this region specifically. The Olmecs will emerge here-ish, I think. Here we go. This is a map of modern day Mexico with its states. The Olmecs will emerge here. Okay. The Olmecs emerging from previous farming cultures. Okay, so they inherit their agricultural techniques from their ancestors that are already in this region. Distinctive Olmec art / architecture / even a prototypical language starts to emerge by 1400 BC. This is where, now these lines are a little bit arbitrary, okay, but this is where we start to see the distinction, the divergence between the previous farming culture and peoples and the Olmecs. This is where they're going to start to part ways. This is about 1400 BC. By 1200 BC, Olmec civilization is in full swing, right? So two major Olmec cities, two major Olmec sites, San Lorenzo and La Vienta. These are going to form together, these will form what's referred to as the Olmec Heartland. This is the kind of the heart of Olmec culture. And from there, we'll see Olmec culture dissipate throughout modern day Mexico, Central America. At the height of their power, Olmec trade routes and Olmec contact will extend throughout all of Mexico and down in almost to South America. A very prosperous people. We found Olmec artifacts, which is evidence of trade throughout all of this region here. So we know that it's a very wealthy society. It's a very prosperous society. There's a lot of trade going on. There's a lot of exchange going on. There's a lot of movements of people back and forth. So these cities kind of represent the kind of economic hub of the 12th and 13th century BC, or 1300 BC, I should say. So again, by 1200 BC, the development of major Olmec cities, we'll talk about the distinctions between these two, but San Lorenzo being the first. Of course, that's a Spanish name. All right, that's the modern name of the city. That's not what the, just a brief, so San Lorenzo is the name given to the site by the Spanish. We don't know what the Olmecs called it. We'll talk about Olmec language a little later on. We can't translate or decipher their language, so we stick with the given Spanish name. Even the name Olmec is not what the Olmecs called themselves. That's what the Aztecs called the Olmecs, and it means rubber people, if I'm not mistaken, people of the rubber. In addition to developing techniques using jade and flintstone and other types of tools, the Olmecs were also able to develop and mold rubber, which they created for lots of reasons. One of the most culturally important will be the creation of the rubber ball that will be used for the ball game that will be adopted by the Mayas. But I say all that to say that all of these names are names that we impose on the Olmecs because we don't know their language, right? And we don't know how what they refer to themselves as. So we'll use the Spanish names, and in this case, the Aztec name. Okay. So why all this mystery surrounding the Olmecs? Why all of this confusion surrounding the Olmecs? If you've done any research into the Olmecs, you've probably heard some pretty crazy ideas about who they are, where they came from, where they got all this technology from. Some of that's a little understandable just because of we don't know. There are major aspects of Olmec culture that we don't know about, and Olmec life and civilization that we don't know about. There's a lot of reasons for this. So we have an idea of where they came from in terms of chronologically where they came from, but there's no like records. They didn't keep track of like birth rates and death rates and who came from who and stuff like that. So we don't, their earliest history is kind of, well, not kind of, it's very blurry. They just kind of, we slowly see them pop up on the scene around 1400 BC. They're just kind of there, right? They had a language. So I mentioned before that the language that the Olmecs produced was the first, well, the earliest example of language we have in Mesoamerica, perhaps the earliest written language we have in the Americas as a whole. But we can't translate it. So this is an example. This is from a stone carving that we have. Some people refer to it as Olmec hieroglyphics, Olmec symbols. We believe that this represents the Olmec language, or maybe a proto-language, like the earliest stages of language development, where they're kind of figuring out what symbols they want to use for what. You see this also represented. We'll see some examples of Olmec mask. The earliest hieroglyphics that we have come from some Olmec burial mask that we have. We don't know. We don't know what these symbols mean. I mean, there are scholars out there who are way more educated in this area who could probably explain this a lot better. Some of them put forth ideas about what this language might mean and what some of these symbols might represent, like this might be an insect, or that might be a bird, and the bird might represent this or that. As of now, we have no established language, okay? But we do know that we have a lot of these symbols lying around. So that leads us to believe that they had a language, we just can't translate it. And as we talk about their cities, which we'll talk about here in a second, their cities kind of come and go, probably because of not economic reasons, but environmental reasons. We'll talk about here in a second. So there's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of questions that we have about the Olmecs that, as of today, still haven't really been answered for us. And we'll talk about the religion as well. So, okay. So two major city sites. There are other Olmec cities, but the two biggest cities we have are San Lorenzo here, which is the first, and La Vienta here, which is the second major city. So again, this is the Olmec Heartland. This is the center of Olmec culture. Okay, San Lorenzo is the first major urban site that we see people start to inhabit around 1500 BC. By about 900 BC, people start to well, by 900 BC, San Lorenzo is basically a ghost town. What we see, it's kind of a somewhat of a pattern that's emerged in the archaeological evidence, is that people are, Olmecs, the Olmec people, are moving kind of from place to place to place to place, probably because of, like I said, environmental regions involving drought, involving them not being able to produce enough crops. We don't know a whole lot about their farming techniques that they used. Several scholars have suggested it's kind of a slash and burn technique that they use, which is only sustainable for a couple of generations. So that might explain what's going on here. Um, some some people are tempted to suggest that they were invaded by somebody, but there's no evidence of warfare. There's no evidence that an invasion took place. So what's most likely happened at sites like San Lorenzo is that the city gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the amount of agricultural output that these people are able to farm gets lower and lower and lower. So these mega urban centers slowly become more and more unsustainable. And as a result, of course, people leave, right? If there's no food, you got to go look for food somewhere else. So we see, as we see the decline of San Lorenzo, we see the rise of La Viena. So maybe this explains some of the transition, right? So by 900 BC, San Lorenzo is abandoned, and we see also kind of a population spike in La Viena beginning shortly thereafter. Olmec cities they represent this sort of city slash temple hybrid model. Okay, so in a lot of these cities, and this will also be typical of Maya cities as well, the city center, the kind of the core of the city, is rooted in religious slash temple practice. That's why people are living in these cities in order to worship their gods, in order to make sacrifices to their gods. So the primary focus of the city is to support this temple model, right? A lot of the people lived outside of the city, and all of the farming took place outside of the city. The city itself is there for economic slash religious reasons, as a hub for all of those activity. La Vienta is a primary example of this, and at the center of the city, doesn't look like what it used to look like, but is a pyramid, now completely covered in dirt. It could have been an earthen mound to begin with. One of the largest pyramid structures we have in Mesoamerica. Of course, it doesn't look like the Maya pyramids, which were carved out of stone, but kind of a precursor to that. And if you can imagine, this would be the city center. This would be the center place where people would congregate in order to perform their religious rituals, and the city would kind of radiate out from that center. And at the kind of the outskirts of that, you have people's houses as well as farmland and stuff like that. And as I referred to before, you have this population decline, this population dip, beginning around 400 BC, decline in Olmec population. Again, we don't know why, but our best guess that we have so far, where all of the evidence seems to be pointing, is an agricultural problem, an environmental problem that affected people's food supplies. So let's take a look at some more aspects of Olmec culture, specifically their art and religion. So from our archaeological digs at sites like La Viena, we've uncovered a lot of Olmec artifacts and art. And a trend that we have observed is that there is a very deep connection between Olmec art and Olmec religion. Now, as far as what this art represents, what this art means, again, we don't know. But most of this art seems to carry religious significance. And this is pretty typical of cultures at the time. This is what we're going to see with the Maya. If you look elsewhere in the world, this is what you'll see with any other civilization, really, in its earliest outsettings. So, yeah, a close connection between Olmec art and Olmec religion. As far as Olmec religion goes, all right, so we're talking about, if you've had a class with me before, if we've had a discussion about these early civilizations, these are in academia what we would call primal religions. Most primal religions are first and foremost, polytheistic, right? Multiple gods and goddesses. Um, these gods and goddesses are typically associated with events that we see in the natural world. So, for example, the gods and goddesses associated with the sun, the moon, rain, mountains, rivers, you know, natural phenomena slash natural events. Okay, and this is what we see with the Olmecs. One distinctive feature that we do see with Olmec religion is that a lot of emphasis is placed on the animals. So specifically predators, and predators that are kind of at the top of the food chain, feature prominently in Olmec art and religion. So we see, for example, jaguars, eagles, um, even things like sharks featured, and crocodiles featured in Olmec religion. All right. And depicted in Olmec artwork as a result. And this is what we have an example of here. This is an intermixing of a jaguar and a human called a were-jaguar, kind of like the werewolf, right? This is a were-jaguar. You see kind of the teeth represented here. These combinations of peoples and animals also feature in what we believe to be Olmec mythology, the belief that animals and humans were once kind of connected, that we see here with the were-jaguar, for example. Like I said before, natural places feature prominently in Olmec religion, especially mountains, rivers, also the ocean. Okay, mountains we're kind of seeing as this junction between the sky and the earth, and possibly a portal to the underworld. Again, we see this feature prominently in a lot of primal religions, something very similar. The hard thing about Olmec religion is that we don't know the names of any of these people. It's not like we can label them like Zeus or Hera, or even like in Egyptian mythology, like Horus and Osiris. We can't put names on who we think these people are, but we have an idea of the sort of gods and goddesses that they represented, if that makes sense. Okay. So just a couple more examples here before we leave. The sky serpent, the feathered serpent, features prominently in Olmec art and probably Olmec religion. The feathered serpent's important because we also see the feathered serpent in Maya mythology. Quetzalcoatl, I believe its name is. You see this on the pyramids of Chichen Itza, kind of carved. So this is the reason why we talk about Olmec influence. In religious studies, we call this religious synchronism, is when two cultures kind of meet and then they start to like intermingle with each other, right? So part of the Olmec influence, we believe, comes in the forms of gods and goddesses like the feathered serpent, right? Which we see represented in Maya religion, which we also see represented in Aztec religion, stuff like that. So coming back to the big head guys, right? These carvings are huge, by the way. They're like 12. They're taller than like 12 feet. Really big. Who are these people? Again, we don't know. Our best guess at the moment is some scholars have suggested that these people are Olmec kings or Olmec rulers of cities like La Venta, for example. We have evidence in some places that these heads were buried, and that also these heads suffered from, what's it called? They were messed up by people. They were vandalized, right? So some scholars suggested that these heads represent the faces of rulers. Maybe they were vandalized because people didn't like that ruler. Maybe they were buried. The idea behind the burial of the heads is that perhaps this represents like the king's death, right? The king passed and is buried, so we're going to bury the king's head. Uh, Maybe this shows signs of ancestor veneration, like we see in Eastern cultures. The fact of the matter is, we don't know. Were these people kings? They might have been. We know they're important, right? Not everyone gets a giant stone head carved after them, right? So they had to be somebody of importance, somebody that had maybe a lot of wealth that could pay for such a thing. Um, a few more things. So this helmet that this head is wearing, probably made out of rubber, could represent like a battle helmet, like a helmet that a soldier would put on. So maybe this is a like a warlord, a king that's leading a powerful army. But it could also, getting back to the Olmec ball game, it could also represent like an Olmec ball player. So another idea that's come up is maybe these were famous like sports athletes. Again, hard to say, really hard to say. All right. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, please let me know. And next time we'll talk more about Olmec influence, how they influence the Maya and Maya, the development of Maya civilization. Have a good one.